Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Jenny told me just to start, so I guess I'm just supposed to start. Welcome to Adult Formation. My name is Sam Martinez, and I am with you today, I guess you might say. And so I'll say a little bit more about myself in just a second. But Sam is short for Samuel. Thank you. Sam is short for Samuel, which of course is a name in the Hebrew Bible which means called of God. So no pressure, right? My name literally means called. It's about the topic that we're on today. But we've been exploring for the past several weeks this idea of the vocation of faith, right? And we've had some really powerful presentations. I've gone back and listened to them. The one on dreaming was really, really fascinating. And I loved Andrew Westover's reflections. I think it was the second one in the series. What does it mean for God to call us, right? What does that look in our, how does that look in our real lives? Our fellow parishioners have really done some important groundwork, but I kind of want to trouble the waters a little bit and kind of reflect on what it means to plant as a vocation, right? What does it mean to plant as a vocation? Now, planting is a weird metaphor. I'm going to take this up. Planting is a weird metaphor because it's a bit dated, right? It's a bit strange. It's actually kind of dirty. It's not the kind of thing that most of us probably do in our day-to-day lives, but I really actually think it's a pretty powerful metaphor for what we're doing. So unless you spend all your free time at Pike's Nursery, no shame, that's a great place, or you are a gardener for a trade, you might not think a lot about planting, but I want you to help me think about it today. Here's the truth. You don't plant to prove something, right? You plant because you trust the future. You don't plant to prove something. You plant because you trust the future enough to prepare for it. So let's think about this and think about it particularly in this way. The idea that I think the kind of big idea I would say, if this lesson has a big idea, is that vocation is practiced before it's understood. Vocation is practiced before it's understood. In other words, to extend the plant metaphor, you plant before you harvest, right? You plant and you tend before you harvest. So I think vocation is practiced before it's understood. A lot of times we want vocation to be clarity, right? It's like a memo from God with like checklists of things that you've got to do, or it's a voice, right? Like in the Bible, when Samuel hears God's voice in the temple in the book of Samuel, and Samuel responds, right? There's something about an extrinsic or something that speaks intrinsically to us that we're looking for oftentimes in our calling. And I think that's good and right in many cases, but I think it's oftentimes more complicated. So we want calling to arrive with clarity, like it's a memo, like it's a bullet points, like it's a timeline for our lives, but it almost never comes that way, right? Calling almost never comes that way. It arrives as work. It's quiet. It's repetitive. It's place-bound. And the understanding, here's the key, the understanding, what is it that I'm called to do, right? That understanding, I want to suggest to you, only comes late in life, if it comes at all. I know. It seems pretty cynical, but that understanding, like, what is it that I'm supposed to do with my life? There's a famous quote that says your vocation is where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need, right? And so if you could understand the thing that makes you so glad on the inside and understand what the world really needs, that intersection, you discover it, is the place where your vocation is. I'm kind of working against that. And what I'm saying is that vocation is actually something that you practice day to day, probably in untold and unstated ways. And I'm going to get us to some questions I think that may help us reflect on that a little bit. So just a little bit about me and how I think about vocation. I grew up on a tomato farm in southwest Arkansas, south central Arkansas. Johnny Cash, anybody know the man in black? Johnny Cash came and dedicated our hometown post office when I was like 7 years old, which is why I wear all black today. So Southwest Arkansas. I grew up on this tomato farm. Planting was just the way of the world, right? We planted to eat. We grew corn and we froze it. We canned our beans. We had cows. I mean, it was just kind of the way of the world. I also grew up as the son of a Pentecostal preacher. Also an interesting kind of existence, and shaped in many respects how I understand calling. I share a name with my dad. In fact, early in my career, I was a Pentecostal preacher. Fun fact, I used to preach 40 or 50 times a year. I think I've only ever given like 3 Sunday school lessons my entire life, so bear with me. But there is this sense in our lives and in my life that, you can kind of see this wrestling with this question, right? Where do you come from? What is it that you're trying to who is it that you're understanding yourself in relationship to others? How is it that I see myself in the world? How am I put in the world in this way? These are all questions that we wrestle with, questions that we really try to understand. And I want to take us to the farm. I want to take us to the soil. I want to take us to the earth. So growing up in Southwest Arkansas, I live in Atlanta now, just, 3 miles that way. And I have chickens, 6 chickens in the city of Atlanta, and a garden. And so this kind of way of planting, this kind of being with the earth is something I try to embody. Now, I am the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Candler School of Theology at Emory University. So this question about vocation is something that I wrestle with on a professional level, right? I mean, regularly, every week, I have folks sitting with me in my office, maybe some of you in this room, and we've had conversations about what it means to wrestle with vocation and try to understand that. This is a fun fact, actually, for this All Saints crowd. We have 2 new Candler students from the church coming in the fall of 2026. So the church is doing a good job in helping people understand vocation and feeling a call towards ministry. But not all of us are in that ministerial vein, right? How do we think about vocation more in our day-to-day lives? And that's the thing I want to bring us back to the earth, to planting. So the question that people come to me with in my office is something like this. I'm called to preach. I'm called to teach. I don't know what I'm called to do. How do I figure this out, right? They come and they say, I feel like there's something kind of inside of me that's speaking to me, that I want to respond, here I am, Lord, but how do I figure it out? And what I keep coming back to, I think, in so many times and in so many places, is actually this question of where are you right now? Vocation is not something you need to discover in the abstract, but where are you being faithfully planted? Where are you faithfully planting right now? Right? Not what is it I should be in 10 years? Where are you faithfully planting now? Seeds don't grow in general. They grow in soil, and soil is always particular, right? In Atlanta, we're in USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Zone 8A. 8A. That tells us a little bit about the rhythms of the seasons here. It tells us about the kinds of soils and the things that we could expect. So God does not just call us to everywhere. God calls us to somewhere, to the soil, to the place. And sometimes that's not where we are expecting it to be. One of my favorite passages in Scripture is the book of Jeremiah. Right, the whole book. Jeremiah is this prophet in the Old Testament, and he is speaking to God's people in a real situation. God's people have been cast into exile, right? They're in Babylon. They're away from their land. They're away from their homes. They're exiles in a foreign country. And this is what Jeremiah says. This is Jeremiah 29. So Jeremiah, speaking to God's people, says this: build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Seek the welfare of the city. I've seen that around the church, where I have sent you. Feel the weight of that for a second. Build houses and live in them. Exiles, right? He's talking to exiles, people in captivity. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you. Now, these are not happy gardeners, right? These are not contented carpenters. These are not people who are producing with pleasure. They're displaced. They're removed from their homeland. They're resettled in a foreign country. They're surrounded by a culture and a language that isn't their own. But Jeremiah doesn't say, wait this out, hold your breath, wait for things to improve. Jeremiah says, plant, build, seek, here, now. This is the word, plant, in this place where you didn't choose. Among these people, these strangers who you didn't know. Seek the welfare, the shalom, right? Not just peace as in the absence of conflict, but peace and prosperity in the city where you are held captive. That's an extraordinary demand. And it's interesting, it matters right now, maybe more than we might usually think for a Sunday school class, right? We live in this moment, in this really profound moment where displacement, exile is not an ancient metaphor. There are people in this country, in this city, in our Episcopal churches, who are being told this is not your place. These people are planting gardens that they're not sure that they'll ever see harvest. They're building lives in places that may not want them. They're seeking welfare of a city that questions whether they belong there in the first place. And what Jeremiah gives us is the ability to say, that is not a failure of vocation. That is not a failure of vocation. Maybe that's exactly what vocation looks like. Tending ground that you didn't choose for people who you may never see profit. Planting here is not resignation. It's faithfulness, like concretized, like in a place, in less than ideal conditions. And there's some real virtue in that. So Jeremiah kind of gives us, I think, maybe a way to understand vocation, not as primarily, something that is kind of thrust upon us from the outside, but particularized in a particular place. And one of the other stories that I've reflected on, actually in sermons and in other contexts about vocation, is the story of Joseph. Do you know the story of Joseph in the Old Testament? Give me some of the contours, if you will. You can just shout them out. Joseph, who is he?
Kicked out from his family.
Enslaved, right? His brother sold to enslave him. Yeah, exactly. Advised the Pharaoh. Yeah. The Grand Vizier, right? Interpreted dreams. Yes, he interpreted dreams. He was a dream reader. Pigs.
Great coat.
He was a good cook. Coat. Yeah, he had a coat. Yeah, the coat. Oh, yeah, Joseph, yeah. Yeah, so, you kind of get the contours of the story, right? I'm going to maybe tell it to you from a slightly different angle. So hear it this way. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, right? And he's enslaved for years. For years he's enslaved. They leave him in a pit. They take his coat. They pretend like he's dead. This is not a good situation. He makes his way to Egypt and manages Potiphar's household competently and faithfully. And then what happens? He gets falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, right? And imprisoned. And he's in prison for years. He's in prison. And he runs into these two guys who know the Pharaoh and helps them interpret dreams exactly right. And they promise they're going to remember him when they get out of prison, and his friends forget him, leave him in prison for years in a cell. He finally gets out, interpreting dreams, and then runs the economy of an empire that's not his own. For years, he serves people who do not know his name. For years, in a country that's not his home. For years, under a God whose purposes he cannot see. For years, he does this. And I don't think Joseph ever had a sense of the big picture, do you? It's hard to see the red thread running through that if you're Joseph. How are you thinking about this? How are you framing it? Where would you have thrown in the towel? Maybe, in the pit. I don't know, maybe when I go to jail, I'm unjustly accused. Yeah, when you're sold into slavery, you could just imagine all the ways that, it would be easy to say, this story doesn't make sense. For years. But at the very end of the story, decades later, this is Genesis chapter 50, right? Genesis is like 60 chapters long, so near the end of the book, Joseph is standing over the body of his daddy, and his brothers are all around him. And by the way, Joseph is a real jerk to his brothers in the story. Like, this man is no saint, right? I mean, he's a saint, but I mean, not in. He's also a jerk. And he's standing over the body of his brothers. I mean, his father, with his brothers around him, and he says this. He says, "Everything that you had meant for evil, God has intended for good." Well, that's kind of a head scratcher, right? He says this at the end of the story. The summation of his story is this. He says to his brothers, "Everything that you have meant for evil, God has meant for good." And actually, I think that's probably a statement of vocation, not in the sense that Joseph has this moment of clarity that says, this is the man that I'm supposed to be, but in the sense that he sees providence at work in all of his life, right? So that vocation for Joseph is always, I think, fractured, whether he's, at home, whether he's at Pharaoh's house, whether he's in Egypt. It's always this kind of fractured existence that Joseph has. But then he gets this, it's almost like a glimpse of clarity. It's like that moment we went and saw The Wizard of Oz at the Sphere. It was amazing. And that moment when Dorothy steps out of, the house into Oz and it reveals in 3D and this is almost like this moment that Joseph has at the end of his life when he says, everything that you meant for evil, God has intended for my good. But it's not a statement of vocation, again, that says, I am the Grand Vizier of Egypt. It is a statement of vocation that says, God has been providentially working through my life the whole time. And I think planting actually gives us some interesting images and languages to work with that. We'll come back to a little bit of that next week. I want to know, though, from your perspective, what do you hear in this Joseph story as you think about, his quest, his life? What is it? What are some things that you pick up from the Joseph story in particular?
Never give up.
That persistence, yeah. Bloom where you're planted. Yeah. That faithfulness. Yeah. Stay curious. Oh yeah. 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 Stay curious. What's going on? This is like the active side of the room. Maybe because I'm standing over here. Yeah. That seems a little more like lived, I think, in some vocational senses than just the person who hears God's voice as a child and then grows up to, be the president or whatever it is, the pastor or priest or whatever. Right? Yeah, it kind of fractured or, yeah.
There's something about relationship too. Joseph could have easily told his brothers when they came asking for food, just go away. And he puts them through the house. But he ultimately does honor that relationship.
Yeah, he kind of comes around. It takes him a second, but he comes around and helps him. Yeah. I mean, he imprisons his brother, right? I mean, he kind of puts his brothers through the same thing he went through. Not good, but that's the kind of live life of vocation in a way, right? We don't always get it right. And sometimes I think Joseph is a good reminder, too, of a way that there's a sense in which you can live vocationally and err in that. I mean, I think I was thinking about this very question, Wendy, this one about kind of competence, I think, and also his brothers. And I kind of scratched my head for a second, I think, but he's pretty good he's got a lot of power at this stage in the game, but he's pretty good at like tricking his brothers. His competence, I think, extends to shenanigan, and when he shenanigans, I think he's pretty confident that way. Any other thoughts or reflections on Joseph and his story? One of the things I'd like us to do is to actually plant something. So Jenny has graciously given me 2 weeks. Yesterday, actually, in my house, in my garden, I worked the fertilizer into the soil, and I've got little broccoli plants already growing in my house, so it's getting to be that season. It's a little early, but I wanted us to think about this planting metaphorically, but also in a kind of a tangible way. And so I picked up these things at Home Depot. These are seed pods, seed pellets. And what you do with these is you put a little seed in there, and you can put it in a cup like this after you pop a seed in there. This thing will grow about 6 times in size, and you'll water it. And over time, you'll see that little seed grow, and then, of course, you'll transplant it. So this week, I'm just going to give you the seed. You're going to be like, Sam, I do not want to take this home. I know, right? Sometimes that's the point of vocation. You don't want to do it. And you don't have to bring it back. You don't have to bring it back. I'll bring some more next week, too. And next week, we're going to bring some seeds. And just as an act of kind of faith, maybe a faithful practice, a faithful patience, I thought we could experiment together what these seeds look like. And I've got tomato seeds I'll give you. So come Memorial Day, we'll have the All Saints, tomato pickling or canning or something like that. I don't know. We'll have a lot of tomatoes around here. But I hope that what this can do is open up your imaginary a little bit to see a way that a new practice, the embodiment of practice, can shape your vocation, even if it's not the thing that you're doing for a livelihood, right? To shape your vocation, even if it's not the thing that you're doing that occupies most of your waking hours. That there are practices in our lives that shape our vocations in meaningful ways that serve us in a variety of contexts. So I'm going to ask my wife, who would maybe help me, pass these out. We're just going to pass these trays, and as you take a moment, grab one of these little discs and put it in a cup, and I would just ask that you say a prayer in that moment. Yeah, if you get these cups. Just say a prayer in that moment and ask God to speak to you through the scripture this week, speak to you through this planting this week, speak to you through these images that as they come to your mind this week. I'm going to take a second and start passing these out too. This is a promise for a seed next week. Yeah. Yes. So do nothing with these right now. Just let it be an annoyance on your counter, right? Just leave them in the cup. Take them home. Next week, I will give you the seed, and I will give you some more instructions. I mean, basically, you just put some water in the cup, and the seed will grow. It's pretty easy. You can grow these on a patio. You can grow these in a little container. This does not require any deft hand at planting or husbandry or gardening or anything like that. But here, as you grab these pods, just make sure everyone's got one. You can, like I said, you can get these at the home improvement stores. They're pretty easy. By itself, a seed is almost nothing, right? Especially a tomato seed. It's a speck. By itself, a seed is nothing, really. It only becomes something once the conditions are right? Once it meets the soil, once it experiences the particular soil, temperature, right? The conditions have to be right. If you planted a tomato seed right now, it'd probably get washed away and it'd die because it's going to freeze again before it lives, right? And so it's the promise of the conditions that make planting possible. You can't make this seed grow today. You can't make anything grow instantly. We can't rush it. And, the frustrating thing is there's no guarantee of the outcome when you plant things or when you have chickens. I've got a chicken that's not laying any eggs, and it's like, okay, earn your keep, You can't promise the outcome. There's a kind of a loss of control. And oftentimes the vocational industrial complex, right, is about, in a heavy sense, control, a sense of actualizing yourself. Who is it that I'm supposed to be? And I think that's a good question. I mean, I don't know how in 2026 you can live in the world and not ask yourself some version of that question at some point in your life. But if that's the question that we're asking, if that's the question that's driving us to think about our vocation, I think we're probably going to have a more impoverished answer than if we think about vocation in this other way, using these other images. So, there is no take-home assignment this week. Here's what I would ask again. Say a prayer. Say a prayer. Reveal to me something, right? There is that interiority. And also make me. When after Jenny baptized the church this morning, the whole church, Lizzie leaned over to me and she said, my wife leaned over and she said, there's something really nice about the baptism fitting with your lesson, the lesson today. And I think that's right. And if you listen, if you read the baptism commitment that we made, it was like seek, right? It was all kind of practices to do. Very action-oriented, practice-oriented. And the shape of vocation I want to suggest to you is actually that. It's practice-oriented. We'll get back to the story of Joseph next week. Let me kind of lay the ground for where I think we can go. We kind of leave Joseph in this long middle, right? He's in Egypt. I want us to kind of sit with that, and sit with that particularly with these empty cups with a seed pod in it, right? It's sort of like Joseph. There's some maybe promise there. We don't know what's going to happen next. And then we'll reflect more deeply on the Joseph story next week, particularly in that scene in Genesis chapter 50. And we'll talk about Jesus. Says it's Sunday school, and we should probably do that too. So here's my prayer for you as you go. I don't know what all of you do for a living. I don't know how the shape of your life lives day to day, what kind of the patterns of your existence. But my great prayer, my great hope is that through this week, there can be something, a little pebble in your shoe, a little something that reminds you that there's other things in your life, right? Other goods, other practices that you can embody and virtues that you can embody. And so as you go this week, reflect on that, and we'll come back next week. Jenny.
Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, let's take some, yeah.
Does anyone have comments or questions?
Let me ask a basic question.
Hold on.
It's so loud. Just define what you mean when you're using the term vocation.
Yeah.
Just start at the beginning.
I mean, I think most basically, at the root of the word is calling, but I wouldn't understand that as an extrinsic calling. I think it's something, I would honestly probably trace it back to kind of medieval guilds in some way, right? Like that's probably a good image for what I'd want to use, or like a plumber, I think is an interesting example of vocation. So what I mean by it is a certain kind of embodiment of practices that form us into creatures that God's made us to be. Less, should I do for my career? More about God forming us to be the kinds of creatures that presumes a kind of end, right? That we're fitted for some end, I think.
Thank you, Sam, for today. As I've been sitting with this idea of calling, it feels like a grown-up ask. And you're bringing us to a infantile, in utero kind of task.
Yeah.
It seems like it would be pretty wonderful to start young with this notion of calling and vocation. What would you say to a 5-year-old?
Well, I have an almost 4-year-old, and I wonder about this. I think that the best thing he can do is watch me pray. Watch me kneel and make the sign of the cross. We're talking about ways we can give back as a family, right? Watch us serve together as a family. I don't know. I think there's something, I don't know that I would have anything to tell him. I might just say, this is how we live, That's a good question. I need to think on that one some more. I should tell him something, probably. He's 4. Uh-oh. And Lizzie and I celebrated 8 Valentine's Day last night, and this is only the second time. I speak in public all the time for my work, but this is only the second time that she's heard me speak, so I'm a little nervous right now.
I also had very little idea what he was going to talk about outside of the fact that he was bringing plants. So, so I'm translating your message a little bit, and I just want to play something back. So, are you saying? And I know you do this with your students, right? They come to you with these kind of questions. Are you saying it's maybe less about knowing the answer and more about action and active practice of something and faith? I mean, like, I want to translate what's going on in my husband's mind a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, the implicit criticism here is that what I jokingly refer to as the discernment industrial complex assumes a certain, I mean, you read this in some of the literature, this is not new me saying this, but it assumes a certain kind of white class social location, right? And I think that we've got to think about vocation more broadly than just like white class kind of concerns. I think we've got to think about plumbers as having a vocation in a meaningful way, and not just, they're living their lives as a Christian. That's meaningful, but I think the actual act of plumbing contributes to the goodness of the world in a particular way that makes that person, I don't know, a doctor. You can imagine certain practices, right, contributing to goodness in a way. And I think that's what I'm kind of driving us back to is exactly that, the kind of practices. But I would say that in some way we would want to understand them to contribute to human flourishing broadly, right? It wouldn't just be Joseph's brothers who were enslavers. That wouldn't be a meaningful exercise of vocation, Does that make sense? I wrote 3,000 words for the Christian Century. I mean, not really, but after this, writing this lesson, so I have a lot of thoughts. A lot of things are funding this.
So, so I also have kids, 2 kids, 9 and almost 12. And, talking about them and vocation, I've gotten to watch them try on a lot of possible, lives and vocations, right? Artist, mathematician, scientist, all kinds of things. And so I think that what I take from that is that childhood is a time that we do try on a lot of possibilities in a way that is harder to do once you have a lifetime full of obligations as an adult. I can't go try on a vocation as a mathematician. I would need years of study that I don't have ahead of me. That's not, when you're raising a 9 and a 12-year-old, you don't have time to go get a math degree.
How do you approach that with them, right? Are you guiding them towards certain things? Are you encouraging to think about the common good or their own interests? How do you frame these questions for them?
So I guide them toward the common good mostly through the frame of scouting and church, rather than through, okay, if you become a mathematician, here's how you would be contributing to the good of the world. Because frankly, I don't know the answer to that. Not in a way that would help him. There's a lot of answers. There's not an answer, right? Same for maybe being an artist or whatever, right? There's so many answers that we can have that conversation, but not one where I'm telling them, here is the answer. But I think that sort of having taught the values, they'll figure it out.
There was a big article in the Times this morning about farmers. I don't know if anyone read it, about the farmers in Iowa or Indiana. And generations of farmers, I think, going to your point, just assumed that their children would be farmers, and they assumed, and you can understand there's some good in that, but the latest generation of farmers, one became a lawyer and one is pharmaceutical sales or something, and so there's a question of how does a farm survive and how do these people live their lives, and I don't know that there's any easy answers, like the farm needs to go on and these people need to live their lives. How do you square that? I don't know, we'll look at that next week.
I've also got a side of my family that have been farmers for generations.